Sorry about that. For those of you who are listening right now and coming into our webinar, we'll start in a few seconds' time. We're just waiting for people to come in to the session. So we're just going to wait 30 seconds for people to come in. So I feel like that might be long enough. And apologies if my dog does that again. I will try and strangle her. No, I won't. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome everyone to today's webinar with Wine Communicators Australia. My name is Linda Schenk and I'm the National Chair here and also the owner of Purple Giraffe Marketing Consultancy. I acknowledge that I am hosting this webinar from the lands of the Kaurna people. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you are all working today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people participating in this webinar. I pay my respects to past elders, past and present, and celebrate the diversity and Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing culture and connections to the lands and waters of Australia. Today, our webinar discusses the art of future-facing strategic thinking, and it will be presented by Dr. Russell Boyce. Russell is a very impressive person, and I'm about to tell you just a small part of all the amazing things that he does. Russell is the Managing Director of Mission Assurance and is a seasoned leader and strategic advisor with 35 years of experience across research and innovation space, mostly in the global aerospace section. He works across universities, industry, professional bodies, and government agency. He excels in providing strategic thinking, leadership development, and education in applying technology and innovation to solutions of the modern day challenges. Russell helps teach such strategic thinking to senior executive education providers and at the global top 5 business school called INSEAD. Russell has a great understanding of the terminology of what INSEAD, and he may share it with you later, he may not. In his spare time, Russell and his wife Tracy, operate a small vineyard in a winery in the Canberra region. We have allowed plenty of time for questions at the end of this presentation, but if they come to you, please feel free to add them into the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Please try and use the Q&A button because within this webinar, it then records those questions. And if we don't get to answer them for you through the webinar, we may be able to come back to you at a little later stage to answer your questions. As usual, this webinar will be recorded and is being recorded right now, and a link will be provided to you once the webinar is completed, should you wish to watch it again at a later stage. But for now, it's enough bumbling from me. It's my pleasure to hand you over to Russell Boyce.
Linda, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody for joining. Let me share screen and go into presentation mode. And I'm pretty confident, but Linda, can you nod or squawk or something? You can see my title slide.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So again, thank you, everybody. The art of future-facing strategic thinking to help build a resilient Australian wine sector. What I'm going to try and do in the next half an hour or so is give you a glimpse into a way to do that future-facing strategic thinking as opposed to looking in the rearview mirror. And I'll explain what I mean by that as we go along. And I'm going to give you a bit of a teaser, not the final say, but a bit of a teaser in how one might apply this to building a resilient Australian wine sector. First of all, just to focus in a little bit on the bio that Linda just read out to you. That image there is representative of the 35 years that I spent pursuing disruptive technology and disruptive innovation. The last 10 years of that 35 years, which finished a couple of years ago, I was building and leading a space program out of Canberra. We built and flew a number of small spacecraft that were truly the state of the art globally for miniature spacecraft. And from that, we spun off 3 companies. So I was fortunate to start a company called Skycraft, which specialises in space-based air traffic management. Another company, Infinity Avionics, which I chair, That's building intelligent optical sensors for aerospace. And there was a third company that's building digital twins for the aerospace sector. These are all disruptive technologies, and there are disruptive business models involved. And along the way, I learnt a lot about the art of leadership and building teams and strategic thinking. And as a result, I've been teaching for a few years now into INSEAD, which, as Linda mentioned, is one of the top 5 business schools in the world. It's based just outside of France, just outside of Paris in France. It was established just after World War II to help rebuild Europe and to provide Europe with a school of the caliber of Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, and so on. But it also has a significant campus in Singapore, where I was privileged to do their immersive leadership program back in 2017, and I now teach into that program. I also now teach into the Thunderbird School of Global Management, the same sorts of stuff. It's part of Arizona State University, which is the largest university in the US, and Thunderbird has a truly global footprint. They've got 15 locations across the world. So I want to firstly get across to you the following concept, the concept of the altitudes of leadership. And this is not a hierarchical thing. This is not the concept of the person at the top of the mountain is the CEO and at the foot of the mountain is the worker bee. It's not that at all. It's more altitudes in the way you think. There are 3 such altitudes, and this is a concept coming out of the INSEAD Business School. One of them is the 50-foot level. It's the tactical, operational execution level. And it's what most leaders spend their time doing. It's a very important altitude, but there are 2 others that are extremely important. One of those we call the 5-foot level. That's the personal level. That's the level where you're aware of your own strengths, failings. You're aware of psychology, of how to build team attributes, how to build culture, how to communicate. That altitude of leadership is extremely important. But the third one, and that's the one that's going to dominate this webinar, is the 50,000-foot level. That's the strategic visionary level, the level where the leader is able to do that future-facing strategic thinking, is able to build vision, is able to inspire, is able to take people on the journey. So let's get into it a little bit. And we're going to do it for the Australian wine sector. So here's a bit of a stab, not necessarily the full story, but a bit of a stab at a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats chart for the Australian wine sector. Firstly, the strengths, just 3 of them there, but there are many strengths that could be listed, but 3 of them are our global reputation for quality of our wine, the robust research and development infrastructure that we have established over the years through the likes of CSIRO and Australian Wine Research Institute and so on, and our sustainability initiatives. We have weaknesses, though. We depend on exports. Export dollars are a great thing, but export dependency can be a weakness. We have slow adoption of innovation, particularly in the smaller wineries and vineyards. We face climate challenges, and my understanding is that there is at least some disconnect amongst the stakeholders, disconnect between some of the wineries and vineyards and Wine Australia, for example. There are threats. The climate is changing. There are new entrants that put competitive pressures on us. There are stricter international regulations and so on. But there are opportunities. We have emerging markets. Climate resilient varieties of grapes are being introduced. And we have this growing surge of digital transformation, which is not just about the latest computers in our offices. It's about embracing technologies such as artificial intelligence and all that could mean, blockchain, and other disruptive technologies. So let's consider this chart here as a stab at defining the Australian wine sector. What could possibly go wrong? Disruption is happening all the time, and it's coming faster and faster. It's happening in stronger and stronger waves. And it comes from over the horizon, well, I was going to say over the horizon, from directions that are unexpected quite often. Often disruption in the form of technology, different business models, pandemics, geopolitics, demographic changes, workforce changes, et cetera, et cetera. They come from other sectors. There'll be something brewing up in a sector other than the wine sector, and it will come over the fence and disrupt us. Here's some example of some companies that have been disrupted, and I'm sure you'll know all of them. Kodak was completely disrupted and went out of business because of digital photography. Blockbuster had the opportunity to buy Netflix for $50 million. Didn't get it. Netflix and streaming, digital streaming, put Blockbuster out of business. Nokia was disrupted by Apple and Androids, smartphones. Huawei, they're having trouble. They're being disrupted by geopolitical issues, the pressures on them, particularly from the US, and regulatory change. Volkswagen was disrupted by scandal to do with Dieselgate, also regulatory changes and electric vehicle startups. And BP, British Petroleum, disrupted by environmental activism, regulatory change, and clean energy startups. And the list goes on and on and on in all sorts of different ways and all sorts of different sectors. There are examples that we could list in the wine sector. In fact, let's name one of my favourite disruptions by an Australian wine organisation of American organisations is what Yellowtail Wines did to the American wine sector. So it's really, really critical to be looking out, to be scanning the horizon, and based on that, taking steps to prepare. And that leads the leader to ask two questions. What's new? So that's the horizon scanning. What's going on out there? What's happening in the digital world? What's happening in the biotech world? What's happening in the fintech world? What's going on out there that could disrupt me? And on the basis of that, what if? What if this happened? What if we embraced that? What if Newco, a newcomer, a new company, what if Newco would appear on the scene armed with such technologies, armed with new disruptive business models, armed with regulatory changes, activism, whatever the form of disruption might be? What if they took it to us and disrupted us? What are we going to do about that? So the rest of this webinar is aimed at giving you some insight into a way of dealing with that, of asking those questions. And it's actually the strategic thinking facilitation that I assist with at the INSEAD Business School in both their French and Singapore campuses. And I also do it at Thunderbird. I'm going to give you a quick example of how to ask what's new, and then we'll spend the rest of the time asking what if. Here's an example of how I ask what's new. I listen to podcasts and I look out on the web and I try to understand who is investing in what. And here is an example of who is investing in what. Incutel. It's one of the largest venture capital funds. It's in Silicon Valley, and it was set up by the CIA. They got a huge amount of money, and what they invest in gives you a good idea of what's coming down the pipeline. You can see some of them listed there. I went to their website and I did an analysis of the most recent 60 investments that they made in companies. And I've put it together on this chart there. And you can see, if you look at the right-hand half of that chart, there's a lot of artificial intelligence. In fact, let's say the right-hand 2/3 of that chart, a lot of AI, a lot of digital transformation, a lot of sophisticated technologies. But then the rest of it, there's sensors, there's materials, there's biotech, there's energy. These things are coming down the pipeline, and organizations such as Incutel care about that. So that's a really, really quick insight into how one might be asking the what's new question. There are other ways. Let's move to what if. And this requires a mindset change. What do I mean by that? What got you here won't necessarily get you any further. What made you as a leader and what made your organization successful so far isn't necessarily going to be the right thing for the future. If you don't change your mindset, then you're stuck looking in the rearview mirror, and that's very dangerous. Now, you could look to the future and say to yourself, all right, we need to embrace innovation. We need to do something innovative. We need to change the way we do such and such. If that's the way you approach it, risk aversion will kick in, may well limit you. There may be very, very good pragmatic business reasons why you won't take the steps to implement innovation. So how do you do it? How do you apply the cattle prod? The way you do it, and the way I'm going to show you in the rest of this webinar, is to think about how a combination of NewCo and disruptive forces and absolutely unconstrained resources, endless money, extremely agile business models, extremely short timeframes, how might all of that together not just create some discomfort for you, but literally destroy you? And if you think about it that way, it starts to open the mind up. It starts to make you think of all sorts of possibilities, and some of them are going to be crazy. Some of them are going to be science fiction, but not all of them. Some of them are going to be science. Some of them are going to be realistic, plausible things that might actually take you out. And once you start to grapple with that, you can start to think about how to defend. So we're talking about an approach that INSEAD called the Phoenix encounter. Take your organization, kill it, burn it to the ground, and then rise something new out of the ashes. It's not a silver bullet, although I have seen quite a few examples now over the last few years where organizations applying this approach have actually found a silver bullet and staved off significant attacks successfully. But in general, it's not a silver bullet. Rather, it's a way of getting you to change your mindset, to think constructively and creatively about what could happen to you, and therefore think about how to defend against such things, and therefore be in a better position, a more resilient position moving forwards, because inevitably disruption, will come. So what does the approach look like? I've described NewCo with its unconstrained resources. Now, NewCo could be NewCo could be another company, it could be a government agency, NewCo could even be force majeure. But whatever it is, it's big and nasty. You, in diverse small teams, and I emphasize diverse because it needs thinking that's not just anchored in bias from within your company, within the wine sector. It needs some diversity of thinking so that you can ideate as many ways as possible that NewCo might attack you and destroy you. And the following is not allowed at this part of the process. You can't say, oh, that would never work, or we'd never be allowed, or NewCo would never be allowed to do that. That's not possible. While you're ideating, you're trying to get as many ideas on the table as possible. If you start analysing idea number one, you'll never get to idea number 7 or idea number 15, and it may be that idea 7 and 15 together are gold. Jeff Bezos took this approach. Once upon a time, he had a business called Amazon, and Amazon was selling books and getting them to you in physical form. And he said to Steve Kessel, your job is to kill your own business. I want you to proceed as if your goal is to put everyone selling physical books out of their job, including Amazon. And Steve Kessel went about doing that, and look where they are now. What you do then is choose the combination of attack options which, if launched at the same time, would really hurt you. It's usually not one thing happening that gets you. It's usually more than one. And then you defend. You ideate creative ways to defend. And when you do that, you're doing that from the perspective of your real day-to-day business with constraints, with time limitations, with with fallible leadership, etc. You ideate ways to strengthen and fortify and start to go a little bit on the front foot. And then based on all of that, you think through what your organization might look like or what it should look like in the future, a few years from now, if you do successfully fortify. And if you can imagine what it looks like, then you can start to build a strategy, some tactics that you can start to execute to step by step get you there. A little bit closer look at the defense. I've just mentioned the fact that you need to acknowledge current constraints. If this is to be useful to you in the wine sector, you need to defend not on the basis of limitless resources and not on the basis of amazing disruptive technology that might magically appear next year, but nobody's thought of it yet. There are conventional tools that you can use as well, traditional business practices. And you need to ask yourself some questions that can be very helpful along the way. One question is, what does Newco have that you really want? Now, the correct answer to defend against Newco is not, let's just do what Newco's doing, because they're doing it with unconstrained resources. But it is correct to say, well, maybe there's something that they're doing that we should have a think about. What do you have that Newco doesn't have? For example, you've been in this sector for a long time and they haven't. You've got endless data on your own processes, on your market, and they don't yet have that data. These are examples of what you have that they don't. You have talent. You have leadership that know the scene. They don't necessarily have that. Out of all the things that Newco is trying to do to you, is there an idea that you could tinker with? Bit of a pilot study, get some data, show that it shifted the needle on the dial just a little bit, take the data to the CEO, take it to the board and say, hey, if we were to try this out at slightly larger scale with a bit more funding, maybe we could do this. There's evidence to support that we could really get somewhere with this. And finally, is there something that you're doing now that is a vulnerability, a weakness, which if you don't fix it, somebody's going to attack it? And then finally, you imagine what you're going to look like in the future if you've successfully done this. You build that SWOT, but you build a future-facing SWOT. What would your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats look like in, say, 5 years from now? Okay, enough of the theory. Let's apply it to the Australian wine sector. And I think we're going fairly well for time. Now, you can see from that image, and I showed it at the start of the webinar, I'm a keen user of AI, and I had Perplexity.ai generate this image for me to try to capture this future-facing strategic thinking for the Australian wine sector. And I'm going to mention Perplexity again in just a moment. So what's the process I followed here? For the purpose of this webinar, I didn't have diverse teams of half a dozen people from all different sectors, some inside the wine sector and some outside, to pull together into a process lasting a couple of days. So instead, I teamed with Perplexity.ai. Now, Perplexity, imagine ChatGPT plus Microsoft Copilot plus the Google version. There's a whole bunch of them. Perplexity gives you access to all of them. It's the only one that I know of that gives you references and citations. If you do AI queries and searches with Perplexity, you'll get not just answers back, but links to citations, to websites, to documents. It's the large language model of choice for the global research community. Now, I want to spend just a moment giving you an aside here. Here's another image that I had Perplexity generate for me. And it's to capture the following concept. There's the wine sector, there's a vineyard, and there's an AI intelligence thing, an AI brain with all the networks and neurons and so on. Look up in the top right-hand part of the image. you can see a statistical distribution of something. Let's imagine that that statistical distribution is the intelligence represented by all of the information available publicly on the internet. And imagine that these large language models were trained with access to all of that information. And some of it's really, really good. Some of it's really, really stupid. The net average intelligence, if you like, of all of the information out there, let's say it's got an IQ of 100, somewhere in the middle there. If you ask ChatGPT or Perplexity or any of these models an average question, you're going to get an IQ equals 100 average answer. But if you practice the art of asking sophisticated questions, like don't just ask a simple question, ask a question that's 1 or 2 paragraphs long or more, and load in on top of it documents that you might have written or that might have come from other parts of your sector or other sectors. Make the question as complex and sophisticated as you can. You can force those large language models down different neurological pathways, artificial neurological pathways, and start to tap into some of the even genius information that's built into them. You'll be startled at the responses that you can get back, at the quality and the depth of some of the answers. So that's what I tried to do. I teamed with Perplexity, and some of the inputs that I put in were, for example, strategic plans and recent reports from Wine Australia, from Australian Grape and Wine, and also some of my own thinking on the wine sector and my own experiences in disruptive innovation and in translating R&D and in strategic thinking. So I loaded various bits and pieces of documentation I could get my hands on. I loaded it all into the query, and I said to Perplexity, right, we're going to follow the Phoenix Encounter method. We're going to do this, and we are going to destroy the Australian wine sector. And then we're going to put it back together. Now, what you'll see in the following few slides, I'm just trying to be mindful of time. I think we're good. You'll see examples of attack options that Nuco might launch at the Australian wine sector or at sample organisations in the Australian wine sector. Now, some of these options I think are really good. Some of them might be completely stupid. But if you get enough options, and if you get them particularly with diverse teams of humans some of whom know the sector, but some of whom who don't know the sector and who can come up with out-of-the-box ideas completely unconstrained by bias, and you get enough of these ideas, and then you distill them and dig down into them a little bit, you'll start to see some things that could happen which might scare you. So, some attack options. Firstly, under the category of disruptive technology, what could Nuco do with disruptive technology to attack the Australian wine sector? Well, they could use precision agriculture and robotics. Nuco comes along with advanced robotics and Internet of Things and does great things in the vineyard and in the winery. Nuco comes along with artificial intelligence-driven consumer insights, both Australian consumers and global consumers, looks at emerging markets and has a very, very rapid understanding of the changes out there and what could be touch points for consumers. Nuco comes along with blockchain. Now, Wine Australia and Australian Grape and Wine are exhorting us to be more transparent with end-to-end auditability, traceability. Well, blockchain can do that. Nuco comes armed with blockchain. Nuco could do something wild like attaching augmented reality tags to wine labels so that you can engage with the wine in ways that weren't possible before. What about innovative leadership attack options for Nuco? Well, they might rapidly diversify the products, start moving wine into nutraceuticals, beauty products, etc., targeting wellness. They could bring in talent from across the world. Well, I would say they could also go after your talent poaching. That's something I would do if I was Nuco and I was mean and nasty. They could use agile research and development models. Have a look in your spare time at Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works. That's an example of an agile research and development model buried in a large traditional aerospace company. The Australian wine sector, as represented by Newco, could adopt models like that. Consumer-centric branding. Now, the list goes on. I haven't put the details for business model transformation or for what we'll call macro levers, but let's just touch on them. Direct-to-consumer channels, such as what Naked Wines did. Innovation in sustainable packaging, new ways to produce wine on demand. Now, maybe that's science fiction, or maybe there's some elements of science in there. Shared economy models. The traditional co-op could be reimagined. Targeted export strategies, climate resilient vineyards, lobbying for regulatory changes that will hurt the slow movers, buying up struggling vineyards, disrupting economically. So there's a whole list. Let's see if we go back. No, let's not go back. I think there's something like 16 different options there, and you could come up with many more. So imagine that we start combining them. For example, Newco combined precision agriculture with direct-to-consumer channels with climate-resilient vineyards. Or that combination. Or that one. Or that one. What I've done is take the following four and said to Perplexity, okay, let's defend against Newco that comes with those four things in combination. Direct-to-consumer channels, a lot of investment in climate-resilient vineyards and research, AI-driven consumer insights, and the blockchain-driven traceability. Let's defend against that. So, defence options that came back from this analysis. And I think many more would come through the diverse team ideation, particularly where there are people not inside the sector who are adding their ideas in. Now, I should emphasise these defence options. If you think back to what I said maybe 10 minutes ago, when you're defending, you have to consider the reality, you have to be pragmatic. You do have constrained resources. So what could we in the Australian wine sector actually set out to do in the coming few years that could be realistic given time and budget? Well, we could set up a consortium to develop sector-wide blockchain technology as applied to the wine sector. And we do that to match Newco's transparency claims, whatever they might be. If you extend from that, and I don't claim the source of this idea, this is Perplexity. What if you set up an NFT platform, a non-fungible token, a cryptocurrency armed blockchain platform that provides traceability, enables buyers to put a claim on wine that hasn't even been grown in the grape, the grapes haven't even been grown yet, that ensures authenticity of the credentials, and can even be used to, well, you could get really creative and have collectible digital art linked to the wine labels. All of that doesn't actually sound unrealistic. There are other ones here. We could set up a collaborative hub for AI-driven consumer insights. We could have co-ops that band together to do climate adaptation developments. We could have a task force that focuses on premiumisation, the really expensive high-quality wines. Alliances that are quite dynamic in the way they export. Subsidy program for ag tech, tapping into Wine Australia's research and development money. Go after new mandates, lobby government for green packaging. Fast-tracking regulatory opportunities. And there's a couple here that I find quite appealing. What if we were to build digital twin vineyards? What if we could build a digital version of the end-to-end grape to bottle, the whole process, the whole lot, showing the ESG dashboard, showing the process, just everything about it. That type of approach could well appeal to the growing younger demographics and the digital savvy demographics. What if we were to run war games? What if we were to imagine crisis scenarios and pull together and do scenario testing? And then on the basis of that, what if we were to imagine what the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of the wine sector, or a particular wine company might be in that wine sector 5 years from now? Well, the strengths could be that we have blockchain-enabled provenance. We actually do that in 2030. We have made strides towards climate adaptive vineyards and strides towards AI-driven consumer insights. So those might be some of the key strengths in 2030. On the other hand, we are going to have weaknesses. If I click the button again, you'll see that those weaknesses could well be what we regard as current strengths. We currently regard our premium quality wine as a strength. Well, perhaps we'll be overly dependent on that. Perhaps we'll have bottlenecks in the uptake of innovation because there are too many slow movers, particularly amongst the smaller, less well-resourced organisations in the sector. And perhaps the current sustainability initiatives are going to impose a regulatory burden that we find hard to deal with. There might be threats. There might be threats from a new version of Nuco doing some pretty wild things, perhaps 3D printing grapes or even 3D printing wine. Does that sound like science fiction? It's possible to 3D print food. Imagine that we have climate whiplash, that the climate changes that we're seeing get wilder and wilder, and no matter how well we do with the adaptation of vineyards, we just can't keep pace. What if data sovereignty becomes an issue? What if the sector is AI driven in five years' time, but somebody else, a third party, is controlling the AI, controlling the data, and it's out of our hands? On the other hand, there will be opportunities. Our sector in 2030 in this attack and defence scenario may well have a direct-to-consumer expansion into Southeast Asia. We'll be contemplating that. It might be using precision agriculture methods to do water futures trading. It might be expanding really, really aggressively into functional wines and adjacent products like those nutraceuticals. How would we get there? Well, if we're to get there, if we're to have that future-facing strategic leadership, no matter what the attacks that might come, and no matter how we might think about defending and building resilience, all three of those altitudes of leadership are going to be important. We need the 50,000 feet strategic thinking, and that's what this webinar is mostly focused on. But we also need the 50-foot execution. You actually have to do it. You have to plan the tactics. You have to put it into place and manage it. Do the project management. Do all of the processes of good business. But you also desperately have to do the 5-foot level. Build the culture. Build the high-performance teams in your individual companies, across the sector. Build that leadership and thinking capability of the future. So I'm hoping that this webinar, this discussion provides, at the very least, some provocative thought bubbles to get people thinking and asking questions. And I'm hoping for a resilient Australian wine sector of the future. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Russell. I don't know about the rest of you, but my brain is just exploded. That is outstanding, outstanding. I do have a couple of questions for you, but while I'm talking to Russell and asking my questions, for those of you who have questions, please feel free to put them into the chat section down at the bottom of your screen right now, and we'll ask them of Russell. But my question, and some of them are very simple. So Perplexity AI, thank you for sharing that with me. I've not heard of that one before. Is it free or does it cost money?
It's both. I started off with the free version and found that got me so far and then got me really frustrated. And actually what tipped me over to starting to pay on a monthly basis, which is only $20, $20 a month, just like ChatGPT and all the rest.
Yes.
I needed to generate an image for a program I was running. And I wanted I actually wanted to capture a capacity building program I was running for Ecuadorian university students to connect them and their reality to the world of space. And so I decided to go for that slight extra cost. But what
Yeah.
you get for it, it's outstanding.
Great. And look, somebody might have been able to connect these dots, but I haven't been able to connect them so well. So maybe you could break it down for me a bit easily. So, I'm thinking about a small winery with a small team, somewhat probably like yours and your wives in Canberra. We're thinking, McLaren Vale, Hunter Valley, it could be Margaret River, just a small winery. How do they apply this type of thinking to a smaller business?
Sure. Um, I mentioned that it's about mindset change. It's about
Mm,
the very first thing you got to do is start asking questions. Be willing to read. Be willing to ask that first question, what's new? And I gave just a small hint as to how you can do that, but it might seem like a daunting task to start to get a grip on the things that are coming over the fence from other sectors. But eat the elephant one bite at a time and eat it with the help of, I guess, publications from Wine Australia and so on and so on. But listen to podcasts, even things like history podcasts.
mhm.
Learn from what we've done badly and extremely well in the past. Um, Read the news. The Financial Times I know has like a daily uh, compilation of what's new in the world, in technology, in business, et cetera, et cetera. So
Yeah.
just start asking questions. But then to take it further than that, how would a small organization or a small winery start doing this sort of activity for themselves? Plug for me, I can help. But even if it's not me, even if it's just you on your own, diversity of thinking is really, really important, which means, and using that to avoid the bias that you have from being stuck inside your own world
Mhm.
and being tempted to say, well, that wouldn't work, or that's not going to happen. So perhaps that small winery at a sector event or a cocktail event or something, just have a conversation and see if you can start to put together a friendship group and agree to meet in a month's time and say, all
Yeah.
right, we're going to come in a month's time together and each of us is going to come with a new idea from a different sector. And then we're going to start to ask, okay, given that new idea, what if that could disrupt us somehow? Is that possible?
That's a great idea, and you could do that at association level, which would be a great place to start. Maybe WCA should actually do that. Um, I've got another few questions for you. So podcasts, you mentioned listen to podcasts. Is there any that you're happy to recommend?
Um, there's one that I love called Cautionary Tales. Um, have a look for it. It's on, it it deals with historical episodes where things went wrong uh 200 years ago, 5 years ago, this sector, that sector, any topic you can imagine where things get wrong and how can we learn from that? And I have learned so much from that. But I also listen to podcasts from the technology sector. There's one that I find really, really interesting called, forgive me for the following American pronunciation, but A16Z. A is for Andreessen. The Z is the last letter of Ben Horowitz's name, and Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz together, they were the two Netscape guys from years ago. Well, they own the largest disruptive technology venture capital fund in the world, also Silicon Valley. And there's a podcast, and when I listen to those guys and some of their team talking on the podcast about, okay, what does this part of AI mean? What's going on in blockchain? What about that issue in cyber? How is geopolitics affecting this, et cetera, et cetera? I've learned so much. There's just two examples.
Great, perfect. Thank you. There is a question that's come through and it says, is there something that you can recommend a business to do annually? Because, sometimes these things take a little while to distill down and idolize and all those sorts of things. So what do you recommend for a business to do on an annual basis?
I would recommend that they do exactly this. This isn't a one-off
Mhm.
because things are changing so quickly. And imagine that you did it once and some great ideas came out of it, but some not so great ideas, and you were a bit clunky in the process, and you try to implement a few things and you get 6 to 12 months down the track, and well, that's a good moment to pause and reflect and say, how did that go? Oh, we could have done it accounting for what Mr. Trump's now done, for example. Or what do we do given that this other part of geopolitics has changed, or now there's a new way to control cyclones, or whatever. Things are changing so fast. Just keep
Mm.
doing it again and again. And it's possible to get good at it. But I would also suggest do that what's new thing as a regular practice for you much more often than every 12 months. See if you can do it at least once a month with other people. If you can find some like-minded folks and get together over a seriously good glass of red or not,
Mhm.
do a little bit of brainstorming and ideating
Yes.
and start to build that discipline. Even that alone will start doing that mindset shift a little bit.
Yeah, there's been a comment made here saying that AI has been a great tool for Ben, who wrote this comment, saying that it's a great brainstorming you know tool to use. So would you recommend? You're saying get together with people, which I love, with a glass of wine, which I love even more. We've got to keep consumption up, but is there an opportunity to also use AI to, I guess, get you thinking about the brainstorming ideas?
Absolutely. Like I'm doing that myself more and more because AI well, there's AI and then there's AI. Like those two satellites I showed at the start of the webinar, they had onboard AI, but that was very, very specialized. But these large language models like Perplexity got access to so much amazing stuff out there, but don't just ask a question and believe it. Um, you've heard of hallucination. It's
Mm.
real. Quick anecdote, extremely painful example in my own experience. In recent times, I was running this program, uh, had somebody helping me with some project management for it, and it involved getting emails out to about 160 different participants. And the person's computer crashed, and they didn't feel game enough to tell me. So they scrambled and tried to make up time by using ChatGPT to build the email, use an Excel spreadsheet to build the automatic emailing process, just put it all together, hit the send button, sat back and watched, and then said, Russ, it's all done. And then I realized that the first half of the email process, were approximately the first 80 out of the 160, but from then on it started hallucinating. It was
Uh-huh.
making up people and making up email addresses that looked plausible. And when I dug deeper, it's like, this person doesn't exist. And this person, like, oh my goodness, there's dozens and dozens and dozens of people here that have received emails, but they don't exist. And everybody else didn't get the email. So hallucination is real. So my point is, don't be skeptical, test, continue to ask questions. If it gives you a sophisticated answer, ask it another one. It's like, what did you mean by that? Or, no, I disagree. That can't be true. Please explain and elaborate and give me evidence. Just keep
Yeah.
pushing and pushing.
Yeah, we always say that you need to check the data, but also humanize it as well. So make sure that it is, I guess, what a real person would say. Now, there's been an interesting question here, and it is around blockchain. So could you please explain to those people listening to the webinar, what is blockchain?
So, Linda, either I just froze or you just froze, but are you
Oh,
able to hear me now?
sure, sure. Yeah, yeah. It might have been, I'm not sure who it was, but the question is, there's some people in the audience that are not sure what blockchain actually is. So can you please explain blockchain?
Yep. The blockchain, well, you've heard of blockchain, but you don't know what it means. And you've probably heard of blockchain keys. the blockchain key is like the piece of digital evidence that it's like a really sophisticated encrypted piece of evidence that says, yes, the two people or computers or sensors on either end of a transaction, which could be a financial transaction or it could be an exchange of information, both people or agents or consumers, they really exist. And the piece of information or the thing that got transmitted or exchanged was legit. So this was, where did it start? Did it start with the diamond industry for assuring that the exchange of a diamond, yes, that diamond that I'm buying for $1 it really is the diamond I'm buying. At the moment, at the point of sale, the computer at the seller's end and my computer with no middle person exchange this encrypted piece of information, the key gets created and exchanged. They have the key, I have the key, and if something goes wrong, I can go to court and there is a way to unencrypt that and say in court, this is what was supposed to be sent to me and I can prove it didn't get here. It's the same for exchanging contracts on houses or financial securities. It can be the same for information. And so you could have a blockchain key associated with every parcel of grapes. Every bucket of grapes could have its own blockchain key, and you could trace, with the aid of that key, you could trace that bucket of grapes and the juice that came from it and the wine that came from that, including on this date, this action happened, this wild yeast fermentation, and this was the weather on the day, and it just keeps building up, and you can trace the whole thing from end to end with the aid of that blockchain key. There are computer systems, platforms that are available, capable of doing this. They need to be set up bespoke for the sector.
Right.
This sector could band together to do that.
How extraordinary. Right, change of pace here. New question. With D2C identified as the future channel of importance, how important is it that the Australian wine industry I can't actually read at the moment, specifically to support, embrace homegrown tech options like with wine.com rather than handing over data and money, subscriptions and sales transaction fees to Northern American competitors?
So if I understand correctly the question, to what extent should an Australian wine company or sector rely on, for example, a North American competitor to supply our innovative technology or the data or the handling of that, the sovereignty of it? Do I understand the question correctly?
I think so. And the person that asked that question, please feel free to correct me if I've misunderstood it as well.
The first thing that I'll say in response, these digital transformation technologies that we're talking about, proper use of AI, blockchain, cyber resilience, we're not talking about IT. We are talking about data science and data analytics. And we're talking about mathematical capabilities where the people who have those capabilities, they understand the dance that can be had inside the data. It's not just about employing an IT consultant. And I'm not a data scientist. So to some extent, an Australian wine organisation is probably going, I would say 99% sure, is going to have to outsource that. But I'll give you an example of where we could outsource to wonderfully and keep it all inside Australia. The Australian Institute for Machine Learning is on North Terrace. It's part of University of Adelaide, and it's not so far from a lot of the Australian wine sector, and they are one of the world leads for the development of AI technologies. That's an example of an opportunity for Australian wine sector players to partner with Australian data science and data analytics players to develop something within Australia. Having said that, if you go for the likes of, and this isn't, I'm not advocating for this particular organization, but Amazon Web Services is an example of a North American giant that has a footprint in Australia where the cloud-based AI is on cloud servers in Australia. I think Microsoft does the same. They do this so that they can win Australian government contracts, particularly defence contracts. So do a bit of poking and probing and asking questions, but it's possible to get the disruptive tech done inside Australia on guaranteed Australian-based sovereign-controlled technologies. It is possible.
Awesome. What I might do is, if anyone's interested in doing that, I'll ask them to get in contact with you directly, because that sounds very high tech. I've got lots of questions here, so I'm going to throw them out to you, and hopefully we can get through them all. If not, we might have to answer some later on. Should we be safeguarding our data within our own borders?
I believe so.
That was a quick answer. Good
Yes.
answer.
I can elaborate, but yes, I believe so.
Could you give an example of a wine business you've seen successfully apply strategic thinking in a disruptive or innovative way?
Well, I mentioned Yellowtail earlier. There is a strategic thinking approach called Blue Ocean strategy, where one stops swimming in a red ocean surrounded by sharks all trying to bite us, and it's this never-ending circle of bloodbath. Instead, you create a new market with no competitors, adding new value opportunities to customers in ways that no other wine company in the world is doing it. Well, Yellowtail did that, and they are one of the classic case studies for Blue Ocean strategy, and you can buy the book and read about it. So Yellowtail is an example. I also mentioned Naked Wines. That's a direct-to-consumer, rather disruptive approach, a strategic approach to developing business opportunities, particularly for small wine growers,
Right.
winemakers.
Thank you. Given your background in space tech and their innovation principles for aerospace and deep tech thinking, do you believe, hang on, deep tech, that could you believe could transform wine production and logistics? Do you believe that the tech could transform wine production and logistics? Sorry, I've read that poorly.
Absolutely, yes. I'm just pondering for a bit. I mentioned Ecuador before. Stay with me for a moment on this. I led a program where in the end there was 100 Ecuadorian university students involved in 12 teams, and they each were given the challenge of coming up with a concept to solve a technology challenge associated with setting up a human habitat at the south pole of the moon. But the challenge they chose had to be a challenge that also exhibited itself on the ground in Ecuador. And the solution they came up with had to be applicable to solving that challenge on the ground in Ecuador. And not all 12 teams succeeded, but I would say probably 2/3 of them did in coming up with some seriously good concepts for taking the development of space technologies to solve crazy out there space exploration challenges and say, well, this is how we could apply it in this sector. Could be transport, logistics, medical, food, energy, communications, whatever, on the ground in a developing country like Ecuador. And the investors that I had adjudicating a Shark Tank were like, oh my goodness, there's some good stuff here. So just as an example, yes, it's possible.
Great. Look, we only have 2 more questions. We are at time, and I think the questions are really, really good. So if you don't mind, I will ask you, but I apologise to everybody who might need to leave for lunch, for their lunch break or whatever. But the questions are, with the Australian export dependency being a weakness, what kind of future-facing strategies could help reduce this risk?
The current situation with global tariffs as imposed by the Trump administration immediately gives opportunities to us. It's going to cause headaches as we export to certain parts of the world, but it might open up amazing opportunities in other specific parts of the world. So that's just one way to think about that. But then we should also be thinking about how can we expand our footprint in the Australian market.
Great. And with the world, will the world's biggest wine company in the future be a technology company?
Um, Very possibly, yes. And I would suggest that there are plenty of companies out there that are mega companies, and they became dominant players in this sector, whatever that sector is, by mistake. For example, Apple did not set out to be dominating the music and digital services industry in the way that it does. They set out to make computers, and then they pivoted to smartphones, but they were still focused on the tech. Almost by mistake, they became a dominant player in a completely different type of sector. There's many examples of like that, and it's very possible a big tech company could be the dominant wine player.
And this is my very last question. I apologize again for those of you who need to go. How can wine brands prepare for global market volatility while still remaining grounded in their local strengths?
I would have to think about that. I'm not sure.
Well, there's one to keep us all thinking about. Russell, I want to say thank you so much for your time today. What an extraordinary topic and what an extraordinary job you have. Wow. And thank you so much for sharing a very small proportion of what, your knowledge and what the things that you do on a daily basis. We really appreciate your time. Our next webinar will be held on the 13th of May. And it will be, again, on AI in the wine industry, innovation and best practice. So that's a really great one, I think, for everybody in the wine industry and any sector right now. Just to register, just jump on the website and you can find that up on the website already. Also, just a reminder, WCA members, that webinars are free. If you're not a member already, please sign up, because you get to go to webinars for free, and it's you get to meet great people like Russell. If you have any questions for us, please get on to Alex or myself. But in the meantime, thank you very much for your time, and we appreciate your efforts, Russell. Bye for now.
Thank you.